All right, my involvement in the Burleson group, Stanley County Burleson group, really began in 1985. My family joined Thurman and Mary Jewell on a trip to the Burleson Family Association, BFA, in Austin, Texas, and we had heard Thurman talk about it. He belonged to this group. So Johnny, Carol, my mom, and I went there for a national reunion, and we were very impressed. On the way, we stopped at the Rufus Burleson in Waco, and it's the Baylor University, and we were so well received there. We got there like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's sort of close time for offices to be closing, and we see the statue on the campus, and I walked into the administration office just to ask if someone could give us a little more information. Well, we had the red carpet rolled out for us when they found out that we were Burlesons on campus from North Carolina. I mean, everybody, doors began to open and people came out in the hall and they came out and talked to us, and so we were very well received. Anyway, we went on to Austin, and it was the people gathered Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at a motel convention complex. So most of them were from Texas, and they had packed their bags and left the ranch and had come to town and were having a good old time. And it was quite impressive. Thurman had worked with them and had done local research, so he was certainly the spokesman, and we just sort of went along for the ride. But I, like Daniel was saying, I developed pride early on in being a Burleson. And and I could talk a lot about the Texas Burlesons versus the North Carolina Burlesons, but anyway, we have a lot to be proud of here. Then, when 10 years later, when the local effort for Don Burleson to organize the Burlesons here, we all locally jumped on board. But at that Texas reunion, we wore these nameplates, and you started with, well, I had no idea where to start. And so Thurman said, well, you know, we put down Isaac and whatever and go from there. And everybody would walk up to you and say, are you from the David line, or are you from the, what would they ask? I guess Isaac or David maybe. Is that what the question they would ask? Anyway. Yeah, from North Carolina. Okay. And so that identified you right away, because some from California would have different. But anyway, to be able to list the names from Isaac and Billy and on down, you know, here I was walking around with 7 names. And then come back, and later my child, I could add that one, and that's 8 names. And then I had a grandchild, and I could have 9 names. And that's a lot to be proud of. And as I say to my own little family, you can't go far from home and ask people. Sometimes they know their great-grandparents, but good heavens, they don't know any more than that. And to be able to go back 9 generations, that's something that we all should be proud of. So, I encourage us every year, if I know it takes effort, but I think that we ought to wear those name tags a lot and wear them with pride. My mom and I heard about the gathering at Morrow Mountain for all Burlesons. In fact, I got a letter, and it was from a Don Burleson. So that was the Sunday that we had our own Hurley Burleson reunion, and we have that every year, the first Sunday in June. And so my mom and I planned to do our reunion and then try to get to Morrow Mountain before the event was over. And we did that. So I missed seeing a lot of the Burlesons who came that day. But I was so impressed that somebody with a return address in New York State was calling all Burlesons in this area together. And So we got there, and of course Mommy enjoyed herself immensely, and I can't remember now, I'm sure the ones in this room were there, but Mama talked as hard as she could to the ones who were left. And in reviewing an article that this Don Burleson, who planned that reunion, in reviewing an article he wrote, he made the point that, and I'll read what he says, that although it says, most North Carolina Burlesons would reply when you contacted them, well, that family is not in my line. And he goes on to explain that if you are a Burleson, you have common heritage. I grew up thinking that the Burlesons in Albemarle were not related to us. We were our own set of Burlesons, or the ones in Oakboro we weren't related to. That's another set of Burlesons we always heard. But we do all have a common line in this greater area. So that is important. I think when we accept that, that tears down a lot of the barriers, and it makes people, it's a welcoming thing, so that people will be willing to come and join and try to learn more about being a Burleson. My mom, who was a Louder by birth, wrote an article for JD for one of the recollections, and it's titled Reflections. And in this, she was 94 years old, and I think she wanted to get some thoughts down while she could still get them down. And she's encouraging, sharing a little bit about her life, and then encouraging us to stay active. And I'd like to read her comments. On December the 8th, 1922, at the age of 18, I married into the Burleson family and became a Burleson for life. So she's right, she was born in 1904. So she became a Burleson for life. Blending into the Burleson way of life was not difficult because in our community, the majority of the people made their living off the land. Gathering, preparing, and preserving food went on year-round. Neighbors gathered to help neighbors with harvesting crops, clearing new land, cutting wood, making fence posts, pastures, killing hogs, making quilts, fruit cakes, apple butter, hominy, list goes on. And I can remember that supporting each other in sickness and at times of death, which happened a lot. There was always a lot of support from the community. One Burleson activity that was new to me was fox hunting. Some of the men in the family enjoyed the sport and maintained packs of foxhounds. My grandpa Hurley Burleson always had foxhounds, and his sons did, and my dad did. And they hunted in the cooler weather, I think. Anyway, and those fox hunts went well into the night, and sometimes sort of almost an all-nighter when you gathered the hounds back together. There were many tales that were told and repeated through the years about the antics of the fox or dogs, or on those cold evenings by lantern light. My husband even ordered red fox cubs to help stock the woods nearby, and we see their healthy offsprings even today. I think the gray fox was maybe native, more native in here, but Daddy's red fox cubs soon changed that picture. And it's, I lost my wording here, but anyway, it talks about the Burlesons furnishing timber and helping to build community buildings, and the lumber from in the Indy School gym came from this place and helped to furnish lumber for churches. Most of the families could be found in a church on Sunday mornings. They were real neighbors in time of sickness, and especially with the death in the family. Serving in the military was a tradition that Burlesons voluntarily joined the ranks, especially World War I and World War II. Today, the Burlesons from our area have multiplied, and some have taken the family name far from Stanley County. Most have left the land to make livings in various professions. Some have impressive degrees and titles behind their names, and some with honors too numerous to list. And yet many family traditions have prevailed. Burlesons have always been fond of family gatherings with much good food and visiting. By attending such gatherings, descendants maintain a link to the past and to each other. That is still going on here in Stanley County. As a result, many Burlesons in our area have knowledge of their greater family and have an appreciation of their roots. And I know my Grandpa Hurley always had gatherings at the home place nearby. And it didn't take much of an occasion for us to gather. And so when he died, Thurman, who was living and was an adopted son of his, kept that tradition going, and we would still gather for family gatherings and sometimes go to Morrill Mountain to gather. So, as one of the senior Burlesons, my mom says, I would encourage each of you to continue the traditions begun by your families. Continue to meet and share information. Tell the stories. Learn from each other and instill the pride of family in your children. And remember, our blessings are God-given. That was her thoughts at that point, and I was happy to help her pull them together and share them for the traditions, for the reflections. My mom also wrote an article about seeing the Halley's Comet in 1910, and in 1986 it had made its loop, its orbit or loop, and was coming back, and Mama was looking forward to it. So she wrote this article for, what was his name, Hawkeye, for our local paper. He wrote an article, a column, and so she wrote that for him because there were not many people living who had seen it earlier or who were interested enough at that time to remember it. Now, my mom lived with her grandparents, and living with older people, you hear a lot of stories and maybe remember things that most kids growing up with other children, you have your mind on other things. But living with adults, I guess she absorbed more things, and she loved history, so she remembered things. And she talked about Grandpa. They would go out in the evening, and they would look to the southwest, if I'm not mistaken, in a certain height above the horizon. And they lived on a hill, so they didn't have trees to obstruct the view. And they could see this appearance each evening, and it took weeks, if I'm not mistaken, for it to come into view and to leave in 1910. And the tail was visible. It had a head and a tail that went back, and she described it as the top of the tail was a defined line, but under it, it's almost like a dog's tail would be, like the fur hanging down, so it was wispy under and a defined line on top. And the tail went far back, and all of it had a snowy look. It was not bright shining like the moon, but it had this wispy appearance. And so they watched it over, and I remember asking her about it, and I thought, you know, they saw it tonight and tomorrow night it was gone, and it took weeks. And so they, by hearing Grandpa Louder talk about it, she remembered it, and they had heard about it because he subscribed to the Concord Tribune, and the Albemarle paper was the Albemarle Enterprise. So it was publicized and was going to happen, so they were looking for it. And when they viewed it, it would be after sunset when it got dark in the evening. But by having that experience with her grandfather, I guess it helped seal it in her memory. So when the comet was supposed to return, I know in 1986, it was such a disappointment because, I don't know if you saw it, but it was such a little blob so far away. And I know I was still teaching at the time, and I got up with a carload of teachers, and we drove out in the country to a fellow teacher's home so that we wouldn't have any street lights around. And here we are out with hot chocolate at 4 in the morning, trying, or 5, whatever, to see if we could, and it was such a miserable sight because it was supposed to be the very best evening to see the comet, and there was almost nothing to see.